Laura Becker, welcome so much to Unbroken. I'm really glad to have you here. I am excited to hear about your experience. I know that you are someone who, I'm going to say it, fell prey to the whole transitioning thing, transitioned from female to male, and then you basically regretted it at some point and do what they call detransition. So anyway, thank you for being willing to share your story. I know that's kind of vulnerable, but I know your intent is to help other people not get caught in this web and make some errors that they may regret later. So welcome to Unbroken.
Thank you, Max. I really appreciate having this platform to share my experiences.
So why don't we start, really anything you want, but why don't you tell us your story and like how you even got to that point and just what happened?
Sure. So it's kind of starting in the beginning. I guess I've always been a very highly sensitive person would be a correct label for it. Obviously, I didn't really have this language as a child, and only up until recently did I have a lot of, this is in retrospective, this awareness.
Yeah.
But as a child, I was highly sensitive, and I was always sort of offbeat, and I had a very hard time sort of finding my place or feeling comfortable around other people. And I've since come to realize that this is due to neurodivergence, whatever that means exactly. But I was diagnosed with an autism spectrum condition when I was 11. So a lot of the social anxiety and sensitivities and just sort of developmental differences cause a lot of confusion, but a lot of it's related to that. And I also have a hormonal condition. I have polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, and only recently have I really been understanding that the PCOS has caused mood disorder, which is PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And I didn't really understand what all of these things were. As a child, I had a pretty good childhood. I was the oldest of 3 kids, and I guess my parents always knew that I was different, and they tried to encourage me to, be artistic and sort of help me socially. But as I got older and started going through puberty around 11, that's when everything just kind of fell apart and things became overwhelming. And socially, I greatly struggled. I was having these intense mood swings, which I didn't understand from the PCOS and the PMDD, the mood-based hormonal shifts that happened during some of the phases. And because of the polycystic ovarian syndrome, there's an increased level of testosterone. So there's more acne, there's weight gain, there's more body hair. It's just kind of a masculinizing sort of condition. And it also had accompanied mood swings, which were irregular due to my periods being irregular. And I became severely depressed and severely anxious. And I also had a parent who was abusive to me, and this really started to increase at this time. There was severe psychological and emotional verbal abuse. And so
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. It ended up all of this culminating in undiagnosed complex PTSD, which I only learned about again more recently. So here I am, this kind of weird, very depressed and anxious, socially awkward, young, adolescent girl. I mean, I just didn't know what to do. I was very isolated and had never really been mirrored because I really have a tribe, you know, I didn't have community.
Right.
So that's a large part of sort of the beginning of dissociations from, you know, sex, the category of female sex category, gender roles, creative people tend to be more androgynous because they have higher openness to experience. And so they're, more fluid and open to different identities and roles. And so it was hard for me to have a stable identity besides the one that I was conditioned to have, which was basically a worthless piece of shit,
So
verbally.
Laura, let me jump in for a quick sec.
Sure.
So you're describing, so you're different. You're not the average bear. I totally get that. I was very different as a child too, and I felt kind of like a freak, like I wasn't like the other kids. I had social anxiety horribly. I mean, I didn't even have any friends in school, growing up because I was so weird, and I was just, all I did is read books to get through, right?
Right.
So that's itself so hard when you're not one of the herd exactly, you stand out a little, you're a little odd, a little different. And then you had this condition, which I've heard of it. I thought it was something that brings on early puberty, but you're also saying that it has extra testosterone, so it kind of like it affected you physiologically in terms of your mood. So now that's added on to being kind of different already. And then you mentioned, I think I heard you say, basically in retrospect, now you've discovered recently you were on the autism spectrum. Would that be okay?
Well, I was diagnosed at 11 as
Oh,
being on
okay.
the autism spectrum, but it was a very odd diagnosis where it's actually, the diagnosis is actually pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified.
Okay.
And so that's a diagnosis that doesn't exist anymore in the DSM. And basically it means that you have traits that cluster in an autistic typology, but not enough to be diagnosed with
Okay.
Asperger's or higher functioning autism. So again, it's this weird diagnosis. I don't know, how valid it was, but it didn't get treatment either way. So
Yeah.
that's why
And
I say I was just highly sensitive and,
yeah.
had neurodivergencies.
Yeah. And being highly sensitive, I'm that way too. It makes things very intense because everything is intense: light, sound, people, particularly people. Like I can't do big crowds. Like I would never be able to go to Vegas or Disney World or anything like that, because that amount of stimulation is it's just too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and then on top of it, I don't want to leave out the last thing you said, which is that you were psychologically abused by one of your parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's really significant. And then I just want to say in general, I mean, I don't know any woman who went through puberty and felt comfortable with her body. That's just normal, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
whether you feel androgynous or not, I mean, no pubescent female feels very comfortable in her body. And so you had all these things going on, and I guess, did no one notice or try and get you any help, or you just kind of were left with all this to deal with yourself?
I mean, my other parent was aware of what was going on, but they weren't really able to connect with me. So there was sort of forms of emotional abandonment. And everyone was very aware that I was severely depressed, but I got, the teachers in the schools and, my peers, I was just so, I was high functioning in terms of academics and intelligence and verbal intelligence, and people like that fly under the radar because people, it's hard for them to get involved. And, if you have a parent that refuses to get any sort of therapeutic intervention or change, yeah, I pretty much was left to my own devices.
Okay. So then you got to high school and what happened there? How was that?
High school, there was a lot of radical shifts. I initially there was a very positive sort of peer group formed mostly through smoking marijuana and drinking. So, I was self-medicating, but the marijuana was initially very positive because it helped me to get out of my shell and be myself. And I started to like come back online, so to speak, like being more present and expressing myself and exploring my creativity and fashion, and had some friends in real life. But of course, none of the trauma or environmental issues were, resolved. So
Yeah.
it was just sort of a gradual path of self-destruction. And so I started doing a lot of substance abuse when I was around 15, 16. And then also around that time, I was very online. So I was on Tumblr a lot. And Tumblr is kind of the place where the artsy alternative people go. There's a lot of autistic people on there. There's a lot of gay people on there. And it also became a hub for gender exploration. So the gender identities, the trans and queer identifying people. And so I was exposed to the concept of having a gender identity, which is basically an abstract label that you put on yourself of how your gender feels. Right. It's very abstract, and someone like me who likes labels and abstract concepts, personality theory, this is something that I naturally really gravitated to. And I started identifying as genderqueer at about 16. Genderqueer meaning essentially just androgynous. Most of these labels just mean androgynous, but okay. Genderqueer was kind of like, eccentric, I would call it now funky. My artist and musician name is Funk God. So funky, okay. But in the context of gender, which was very confusing because I was very confused overall. I'm having, these flashbacks. I don't even know what a flashback is. Like lots of like the inner critic was, intense and really vivid from the verbal abuse. And I'm a teenager and I'm autistic and depressed and suicidal. And
oh, wow.
So
suicidal.
Yeah, I had suicidal ideation from the time I was 14. And it was more of a passive suicidality, just constant fantasizing of escape, of death, and, not existing. But I was doing some self-harming in various ways, the substance abuse, right. Missing class, just disengaging from life, cutting, many different maladaptive coping mechanisms. Okay. And so the gender sort of became a thing because it was so tied into fashion, and I was very androgynous, and I have some attachment issues from my childhood abuse. And so I was latching on to celebrities, male celebrities, and a lot of them are creative musicians. And then I started latching on to friends of mine. And, naturally, these are, on some levels, very typical. You just, end up falling in love with a friend, like you're very close to them. But for me, it was a lot more intense and traumatic because of the severe attachment issues that I had. And the fact that we were all sort of creative and artsy and kind of fluid, except that I was completely heterosexual. And there was actually 3 different boys, and all of them ended up being gay. And I basically couldn't internalize that. I had magical thinking that, I wanted them to love me. I felt like that was my only thing that I was living for. You know, it was really, really bad. And they couldn't love me because they were homosexual. And so all of this sort of is being stirred up in this big pot of mess, you know, the trauma and the attachment and the unrequited loves and obsessions and the gender identity. And basically around 16 or so, I started questioning if I was trans, if I, you know, was actually a gay trans man, you know, instead of this weird androgynous depressed straight girl. And unfortunately, I had enough magical thinking and the combination of my own magical thinking and basically delusions or illusions, and then the great illusion that Tumblr and you know, various people in the LGB world tacking on the T onto that,
Yeah.
you know, spreading this lie and this illusion that you can be born in the wrong body. And if you do have a certain personality or you feel a certain distress about your sex characteristics or role in society, that you should try to change that. If you have gender dysphoria, the only treatment for that is to have medical intervention. So I questioned that with everything, with just getting more suicidal each year of high school. And again, there was 3 subsequent unrequited loves. So it's just like one after the other, like the same pattern repeating. And I couldn't understand that it was because these people were unavailable and my type was unavailable people, but I internalized it as, oh, my type is gay men. I should be a gay man as well. And like, you know, it felt safer to me than to be a straight man. And of course, I wasn't, you know, attracted to women at all. And I sort of had this fantasy idea that being a gay man, that my personality and self and quirkiness and humor and sexuality and somewhat more male characteristics in certain ways and romance desires were more suited to being a gay man than a straight woman. And of course, that's pretty much just, you can be a woman in many different ways, as I've learned and embraced now.
Right.
But at the time, I was just desperate, confused, traumatized, and I just felt very alone and abandoned and just trapped in my own magical thinking. So I debated.
I just want to say, gosh, Laura, I mean, all that you went through, you know, that's a lot for a small child. I mean, child, you know, teenager, but now that you're older, you can see how young we are when we're teenagers, right? We're children. And it sort of, you know, it breaks my heart to hear that you were suicidal. I get that. I have been, you know, in my youth suicidal as well, in that passive way also, where it's really just like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to live. I feel so worthless. It's the depression, you know, it's just, it's reaching, it's hitting a wall and not knowing where else to go, right? And so you said that you were still suicidal throughout high school. Did anyone notice? Did you get any kind of intervention for that?
People were definitely very aware. And it was to the point where, you know, it was just such a constant feeling and urge that people kind of got tired of it. And so they were pretty dismissing of it. I did go inpatient 1 or 2 times in high school, but, you know, inpatient, you know, it's not really a long-term solution. It's more just about the stabilization, and you're only there for a couple days. So that never was a lasting intervention. I did try various antidepressants, but they told me I had treatment-resistant depression, which to me makes sense because I did have depression, but I also had CPTSD that wasn't diagnosed or being treated in any way. So of course, you know, how much of the SSRI is going to do. So they didn't really do much. And it was just there was a lot going on. It was very chaotic because of my substance use and obviously still living in that environment with my parent in the same situation, and my siblings then having some problems. And so long story short, there were interventions attempted, but none of them really got through to me. And I saw a couple different therapists, but none of them really saw me. You know, it was very clinical, more of a, oh, you have these characteristics. I think you might have Asperger's. And it wasn't, I just didn't feel, I didn't trust those people, you know, as my attachment wounds. And so unfortunately, there weren't really any interventions that stuck with me during any of that time.
So, so you're in high school now, and how did you, I know that the social media, Tumblr, you know, and just this idea that, oh, maybe I have gender dysphoria, maybe this is the solution. I mean, I was speaking with someone else about this, and I was saying, you know, gosh, just any teenage girl, like we said a little bit ago, going through puberty is going to be uncomfortable with her body. And now there's this savior thing, like, oh, you can become a male and that'll fix all your problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you had this presented to you. And so at some point, was it in high school when, and how did it happen that you, like, did you go to a doctor, or was it a psychologist or psychiatrist? And how did you get into that medical transitioning kind of thing?
So it was more just sort of language and abstract, you know, rumination based in throughout high school. But when I turned 18 and I went to college, I started actually identifying as trans and not just, you know, queer. And then I sort of ruminated on that, just progressively getting worse for another year. And so when I was 19, I finally was kind of at the breaking point of desperation and hopelessness. So I went to an informed consent clinic and was able, actually, this was recommended to me by a transgender professor that I had, that I go to this clinic and get a free prescription of testosterone when I was 19. And I went, and at these clinics, you know, they, you know, it's informed consent, but it's not really very informed because this is very experimental.
Yeah.
But either way, you know, I got the prescription for free, despite, you know, disclosing my history. You know, in the trans circles and the ideology and the rhetoric, if you have gender dysphoria, that's the sign that you're really trans. If you question being trans, that means you're trans. It's all just circular thinking to be trans. It's like a religious sort of idea, magical thinking again. So, you know, my suicidality, many red flags of maybe I shouldn't be doing, you know, this really intense drug of testosterone because I have substance issues, like all these things were not red flags that I shouldn't transition, but green flags that I should, in their eyes.
So you're telling me that they knew about the suicidality, they knew about the substance abuse, they knew about the PTSD, and they still, and that didn't cause them to say, well, let's address these things first and make sure that this is the right thing for you. They just said, oh, that means you're trans?
Yes, that's pretty much what the narrative is of how these places work. All those mental health issues are pointed as signs that you are trans and you should transition as soon as possible, or you're likely to kill yourself. And so the fact that I was suicidal, you know, was again just another sign to them that I need these hormones, you know, and that it will save me. And, you know, so I got that. And then shortly after I got the prescription, I had a meeting with my psychiatrist. I didn't have a regular therapist at that time. I was shopping around for a new therapist, but I had a psychiatrist, and I told her that I thought I had gender dysphoria and I was trans and I wanted to transition. And usually the surgeons, to do any type of surgery like double mastectomy or top surgery, they require one or two letters of recommendation from a healthcare professional. And so I told my psychiatrist about this, and she said that she would look into it. And the next time I saw her, she said that she felt that I did meet the criteria for gender dysphoria and that I seemed stable for surgery. And she wrote me a recommendation letter, and I was not stable for surgery. I'm not really sure where she got that impression. My only guess is that because I'm hyperverbal and tend to be articulate about my suffering, I think I came off more well-adjusted than I actually was, because I was not doing well. But she wrote that I was stable and mentally competent to consent to the surgery and that I would be a good candidate for it.
Wow.
And I did admit myself inpatient again within about a month of that. So obviously I was not stable. But when I was in inpatient, I was very frustrated with my situation, you know, and being inpatient, it sort of motivates you to want to make some radical changes. And unfortunately, I decided to do the radical change of getting a double mastectomy. So like that even just pushed me more, it motivated me more to pursue that. So I got
Can I ask
this,
you a quick question?
yeah.
So to get testosterone injected into you, you didn't have to have any letter from any doctor. It was for the surgery that you had to have that. But
Correct.
you were able to just go in and be able to get testosterone to inject yourself with, just no questions asked? Okay. Just
Pretty much. And every clinic is different, but actually Planned Parenthood is the #1 informed consent clinic now, and you do not have to have a letter. You can pretty much just get it. So so I got that letter from my psychiatrist, and then I asked my general practitioner, you know, who again should, you know, it was not an ethical, neither of these letters were ethical, because neither of these people really, they weren't my therapist. They weren't seeing me regularly. One was just prescribing me medication. The other I saw like once a year. But these are well-intentioned liberal people in the helping professions. And so they wanted to help. So the GP wrote me another letter, and then I had my 2 letters. And then I went to a surgeon in my state, a cosmetic surgeon who specified that he performed mastectomy for trans-related procedures. And I met with him and we scheduled the surgery. And about 6 months later, when I was 20, I had my breasts removed in the double mastectomy.
Wow.
And it was that was one of the worst low points of my life, because I was taking testosterone. I was injecting a high level of testosterone. And again, this is very experimental. So they prescribed me a very high dose of testosterone, you know, regardless of the fact that I'm, you know, a female, that I have PCOS, which already interferes with hormones and things. And the testosterone, you know, not surprisingly, it really exacerbated my mental health issues, to put it lightly, because, you know, I'm still abusing substances, and now I'm basically taking this very powerful drug that's making me even more, you know, impulsive, angry, aggressive, you know, sexual issues, and just, you know, it's motivation, but when you're really desperate, that motivation is not a good thing. It's not like a good drive or discipline. It's more of just like an impulsive, reckless energy. And so I was getting into a lot of fights and issues, and I ended up losing my couple friends that I had because I was being, you know, very chaotic, and they didn't want to deal with that anymore. So I had no friends at the time of getting the surgery. And I also had this is again, is that it's not, the surgeon told me that I should go off of testosterone for the surgery. And so I went off testosterone cold turkey. with no really like supervision, you know? And so that was, again, sort of the height of my recklessness, and it really is a powerful drug. And then I had the surgery, and then right after, you know, I'm trying to tell myself, you know, like, oh, I'm so happy this happened, you know, I'm glad I finally did this, like this is good, you know, but at the same time I'm having grief because I had just lost my friends, including some of these people I had been in love with and still had issue, you know, it was very attached to these people. They were all I really had. So I was in grief. And so after the surgery, I was like, oh, you know, I'll get back to transitioning once I deal with sort of this grief issue. So I didn't end up going back on testosterone. I was like, I'm going to put this off. I'm going to wait until I'm more stable. And losing my friends really was another trauma. And so things continue to get worse. And there was more substance issues and there was an abusive relationship and different things. And basically, by the time I was 21, I was like, okay, you know, am I really going to kill myself or not? Because I've been debating about this for years. And if I'm not going to kill myself, I need to stop avoiding, you know, engaging in life. And I have to, you know, take some responsibility because no one else is going to save me but me. No one's going to come to rescue me. I need to do something. So I got a full psychological evaluation. And that's when I was diagnosed with PTSD. And they don't really diagnose CPTSD, but I later, you know, came to understand it was complex PTSD. And so once I had this PTSD diagnosis, everything started to make sense, because the pieces started to fall into place. And I was on Tumblr, and I was, you know, still in these gender worlds on there. And I started seeing some radical feminist or gender critical writings on there, and a couple accounts from women who had detransitioned, and it was just a lot of talk about trauma. And so I ended up in this very small Facebook group with some other women who had detransitioned, and I finally felt like I had found a community of people who were like me. Everyone had trauma. A lot of them were autistic. And so I sort of mentally detransitioned at that time. And I realized that it was all just due to complex trauma.
Yeah.
And that was when I was 22, and I'm just turned 26 now. So for about 4 years, I've sort of been deprogramming, you know, from this ideology, and, you know, processing the childhood abuse and all of these traumas and griefs from all of these things. So about 2 years now, I've been pretty involved in the detransition movement and speaking out about my experiences.
Well, that's very brave of you. And I consider you to be a hero for doing that. You know, I decided to start this platform for the same reason, to speak out, because I was a victim of pedophilia and trafficking and things like that. And so I think it's so healing. It has been for me, and it probably is for you, to be able to use those negative experiences to help other people, right? To try and do good with it, try and turn that ship around and give some meaning to what you went through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you said it, and that's what was in my mind when you were talking, you know, how irresponsible that no one suggested you do a psychological evaluation before all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it makes perfect sense to me that trauma would be behind it. You know, I remember as a child wanting to be a boy, not like necessarily because I didn't feel right in my body, but because I was being sexually abused. And I noticed that because I was female, right?
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense. Like if you're in a situation like that, I mean, that might be one way that your thinking goes as a child, like, oh, well, if I were male, this wouldn't happen to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really, and you know, I like the way that you said that the psychiatrist and the general practitioner, they're just good liberal people trying to do the right thing. Because I think that is a reality in this whole situation, that, you know, I consider these people brainwashed and programmed into this, because at a higher level, I think this is a really dark agenda. And, you know, obviously when people transition and even detransition, I mean, there is that possibility that you lose your fertility, your ability to have children in the future, right? So I mean, and I don't want to get too personal, so if you really don't want to answer any question, just say, I don't want to answer it. I don't want to, you know, be pushy here, but is that a factor for you? And where you are today at 26, like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Do you want to have kids or marry or any of that kind of thing?
Yeah, I consider myself very fortunate in the totality of things, because I do have you know, disfigurement, as I call it. Everyone has different, you know, views of their own experiences with this sort of medical trauma, but you know, I have a disfigurement. I don't have breasts. Luckily, I was only on the testosterone for 7 months, so my voice lowered, and I grow facial hair just right here, but I didn't have a hysterectomy. My fertility, I think, should be okay. I do have PCOS, which affects fertility, but so yeah, but I know a lot of people who, you know, are bald. They're like 21 and they're bald and they're a woman, and they realize that this was, you know, an illusion, and they've had hysterectomies, and or they've had genital surgeries,
Oh, wow.
and they have non-functioning genitalia and no sex drive. And so in the grand scheme of things, yes, it was very traumatic for me, but I'm in a pretty good place, you know, compared to that. So yeah, it is my goal to, it's my utmost goal to get married and have a family. Um, you know, from the attachment issues, unfortunately, I haven't yet had a positive relational experience. But it is, you know, I've been really focused on determining my values and, you know, accepting myself as a woman. Only in the last year has the biological urge to have children kicked in. You know, it's like, it's so easy for young women who, a lot of them say they don't want to have kids, you know, even really androgynous people like me who, you know, think they're never going to have kids. A lot of women end up wanting to have kids later on. It's very easy to, you know, get sterilized, unfortunately. But yeah, those are my goals, and I am grateful that, you know, I still do have opportunities, even if, you know, they haven't come to fruition yet. But hypothetically, I still could pursue those types of meanings in my life.
Okay. And you were androgynous, and now, I mean, when I look at you, you're beautiful. You look, I mean, I'm not gonna say hyper feminine, but you look feminine.
Yeah.
So that shifted for you as well.
That definitely shifted quite a lot. This is definitely, like, I only in the last year have I started, you know, wearing makeup. I only wear a little bit. Still, like, I'm very sensitive, and like, I don't, like, I would do a lot more with my appearance as a creative person, but I can't stand to wear all the makeup and deal with the hair and like rings and jewelry and stuff. It's like, you know, it's minimal, but yeah, in the past I was very stripped down, very short hair, exclusively men's clothes. Um, you know, still I'm a very short and like petite female, but yeah, very tomboyish.
Yeah. And I mean, but I've always been very tomboyish. I wear makeup when I have to be on, you know, on air and interview people. Otherwise, I don't, because I consider it one of the unfortunate things I have to do before I interview people is apply makeup. You know, I mean, as women, we can express ourselves in any way we want. You know, I don't wear dresses. I just don't feel comfortable in them, you know.
Hmm.
But I'm
Yeah.
married and I have a child, you know, I'm a mother, and I just express myself the way that feels comfortable for me. And it's kind of ironic, right? Because with this whole gender thing that's sort of sprung up lately, it's a little weird because on the one hand, you're supposed to be very rigid. Like if you're female, then you have to like pink and, you know, I don't know, whatever, have all these female things. And if you're male, you have to be like this. And maybe people should just be allowed to express their male or femaleness however they see fit. Then it
Hmm.
goes to this other thing now where it's subjective. It's like, oh, I've even heard people can be female one day and male the next. It's just very weird. So in a sense, this gender fluidity is gender rigidity, right?
Hmm.
It kind of contradicts each other itself. And then, you know, this idea that you know, we're born the way we're born. You know, we might be born gay or straight or bi, but then with this whole gender thing, that's also confused because then they're saying it's not, it's subjective. Like you said, it's abstract, right? So the
Hmm.
whole thing itself is a little bit confusing and I think crazy. And
Yeah, it's a lot confusing and a lot crazy.
yeah. So, and you know, in your case, you were a little bit older, you were 18, but you know, the human brain, I don't know if you know this, it doesn't finish developing and growing till you're somewhere between 21 and 25, right?
Hmm.
So this is why, you know, when you're a child, you don't really have the mental capacity to make these kinds of decisions. And, you know, children aren't allowed to vote or drive or, you know, all kinds of other things till you're 18 or 21. It's a little bit odd that you're allowed to decide to do surgery on your body, cosmetic surgery, and alter your genitals when you're not even allowed to vote. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense, right, with brain development. And so you were at least a little older and you still went through such a harrowing experience. But I've read about other individuals, this young woman, Chloe Cole, who was 13 when they started to give her testosterone and 15 when she had a double mastectomy. And I think,
Hmm.
how is that even possible?
Yeah. Um, I'm friends with Chloe and a lot of these
Okay.
other people, and it is a lot, like they're getting younger and younger that are kind of coming out now. And I mean, there's lots of speculations. I mean, there's of why this is happening culturally. I mean, I think it's a very nihilistic. It is dark. It's nihilistic. It's kind of it's evil in many ways. You know, it's just anti-human. It's anti, you know, it's a sort of deranged form of spiritual or religious belief. It's there's big pharmas involved.
There's a lot of money to be made in this kind of operation, isn't there?
Yeah, like my surgeon who did the mastectomy, he now operates exclusive. I mean, most of his practice is marketed towards basically young women who want to have their breasts removed. And he's a cosmetic surgeon and he operates as young as 16. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of money to be made. And the surgeries are typically done, you know, they're really dangerous surgeries, especially the genital surgeries, and those often require numerous revisions
Oh,
because they're so dangerous. And so these are lifelong medical patients.
yeah,
Um, so a lot of money, and it attracts. I mean, now you know it's mostly attracting teenage girls, which makes sense for a number of reasons.
yeah.
But you know, it's still a lot of these teenage girls. I've sort of written essays about what I call the archetypal FTM, the archetypal type of girl or woman who would most likely want to adopt a trans identity. And I call this the what is it? The sensitive, quirky, artistic, weird girl. And I break those down. And so these are people who are highly creative. They're very open to, modification, expression. A lot of it's fashion based, language based. These are people who might be kind of weird, they are, have mental illness in many different forms, socially different. These are people who are, very sensitive and autistic or autistic typed, and they get obsessed with certain ideas, and it's hard for them to be grounded in their bodies. So, and it can be similar to boys as well, but it is mostly young girls doing it. So, and a lot of them are gay as well. So, it is a type of person who latches onto this, but it is getting more widespread to the point where there's just very young children they're just completely confused. They're not gay. They're not autistic. They don't even really have mental illness. It's just the culture is so sick right now with the isolation and, world events, anxiety, and different things that they latch onto this because it's pretty much the cultural norm right now.
I think that's a really good point, Laura, because we've had this pandemic thing, and no one can hug, or if you go to see grandma, you might kill her, and you have to stay home and you have to stand 6 feet apart. And I know my daughter was in high school and she couldn't go to school anymore. They had to have school through the computer. And it's already hard enough to be a teenager with that. You're transitioning from a child body to an adult body. Sometimes that physical transition's a little faster than the emotional, mental. There's so many issues to deal with already in that age category, that when you throw in that fear, there was a lot of fear pumped out by the media, a lot of isolation, separation from friends. I mean, adolescents need a peer group. I mean, that's one of the things that tormented you, is that you didn't really have that, right? So, so that does contribute. And then you said it's a nihilistic kind of thing. And I kind of agree. I mean, I think overall, just especially for your generation, and like my daughter's not that much behind you, I think young people are looking for meaning. They're looking for, there's an absence of that spiritual connection, right? For that bigger meaning. Why am I here? Why am I in a body? Why am I alive on this planet? What is it that I can do and contribute to humanity? Those kinds of conversations have been erased. They don't exist. And it's all in favor of these identity politics, I'm going to call it, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the conclusion that I've drawn. It's the spiritual void. It's very existential. And like I said, I do think it's people who are more sensitive. Maybe they are a little more cerebral, who confronting these things younger. And like I was having existential stuff on top of all this, and for me, what's really helped is gaining a sense of like spirituality, philosophy, considering like my highest values, and acceptance, sort of a Taoist sort of thing of acceptance and, rational detachment from, these sort of my, psychodramas, and a lot of it's imagination. And it's really hard to have that much awareness. Like for me, my life story has been chaos, and I consider my biggest problem in my life, existentially, to be the fact that I wasn't ordering or organizing this chaos in any way. So I've gotten very into Jordan Peterson, because he describes very in detail how to order chaos. And so all of that's been very helpful to me. And even just having the proper diagnosis of PTSD to help me order the chaos and, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be helpful. I mean, generally, I'm a mental health professional myself, and I don't really like diagnosing because I don't think we're also always moving throughout our lifespan. We're changing, we're growing. I mean, ideally, right? We shouldn't just be fixed. So I don't want to box people in with some label. But on the other hand, it can be very helpful, like it was in your case, because I mean, that really resonated with me. It's like, oh, now everything makes sense. It's because all these things that I don't understand is because I have PTSD, right? So it can help you organize yourself and kind of address some of the things that that before felt like chaos. So you seem, I mean, I don't want to assume because, I don't really know you, but you seem like a well put together young woman today, right now. So
Today, yeah, in this
okay.
moment.
So tell us where you are today. What are you doing and with your life, and how, are you happy, and have you found a friend group, and how have you kind of restored your life after that crazy, crazy experience?
Um, I'm still in the process of, the journey, many different journeys. I've definitely gotten a lot better at managing um all areas of my life, like when my brain really sort of developed a lot when I was 25, and that really helped. So I wouldn't, I mean, I'm generally, I get more enjoyment and meaning out of life than I used to, a lot more. I have a lot more gratitude. I still have a lot of grief, and I still am managing the PTSD and the attachment wounds. And so, it's a work in progress. But the spiritual stuff really helps. Um I do a lot of art, digital art and paintings and photography, writing, music production. I also played hand drums. So like there's a lot of forms of expression. And I've slowly been starting to integrate into my people. A lot of them are online. So there's still sort of a disconnect, but I have a really good support network of online friends and some people in real life. I have 2 different therapists. I do a lot of different self-healing stuff.
Good.
Yeah. So, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Everything's cycling around, life, death, and rebirth. But yeah, overall, it's much better, and I do have a lot more hope. That's the biggest thing.
Good. Good. Yeah, I mean, you're still very young also. And so, from someone who has several decades on you, your 20s are for figuring out yourself and who you are, and you change throughout your life too. What you want to do might change, so it's good to just be open. And it sounds like you're able to find some happiness. You have some online friends, and I would guess one of the things, I mean, I'm so proud of you for telling your story. I read your story, I forget where, and I was just really impressed with you and others who, I mean, it's hard to come forward and say, I did this and I regret it. And so bless you for using your life story to educate others, to awaken others, to help other young people not just maybe not make that mistake with that gender transition, but also, you're on the spectrum, you are an artist, you're different. So you're validating that that's okay for other people, So,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. I'm very proud of you for what you've done. And you're only 26. So I imagine that you're probably going to have a beautiful life and make an impact in this world even more so than you are right now.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Definitely, I'm kind of, for me, it's all about balance. So trying to balance my personal healing, but then also psychoeducational sort of, public stuff, and definitely being able to use my writing and my speaking, my gifts and things to promote awareness has been really, really rejuvenating for me, just because for such a long time I was, very isolated and I wasn't being mirrored. So it's been really good. And there's a lot more seeds are, being planted and things are growing. So there's going to be a lot more advocacy, and I'm getting involved in different upcoming advocacy projects. So that's the thing, is like you said, just being open to the opportunities, and kind of overcoming the fear of taking those opportunities and just seeing where they go,
Yeah. And that fear is totally normal. I mean, I'm, almost 59 years old, and I still have fear about new things that I do, and I have PTSD, complex PTSD as well. And so healing is ongoing. I mean, I'm a million times better than I was, a decade or two or three ago. But it's always a journey of refining and growing. But I have come to understand that the difficulties in my life, actually, you can turn those around and make them gold. You can then use that to fuel like a much more meaningful life than you may have otherwise had. So it's not all bad. If you take the experiences and you turn them and you use them in a productive way, then that's a life well lived. So So you mentioned you write, you're an artist. Where can people find you and find some of your work?
So you can find my portfolio of work on my website, funkgod.com. Very proud of that. And also I have a Substack, which is Funky Psyche. So you can read some of my essays. I'm also Funk God on YouTube, and Funk God Artist on Twitter and Instagram. And any of those places you can contact me. But if anyone wants to reach out to me, my email is public. So it's laurabeckerofficial@gmail.com.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. And, Laura, as we wrap up, is there something that you would like to say to young people or, teenagers that are going through that struggle that you just so eloquently described? Like, do you have a message for them?
I'd say my greatest message is acceptance. Acceptance that there are certain things about, this existence and reality that really suck, that we don't like, that aren't ideal, or that we don't understand, and that have pros and cons, like having a body, for example, having a sexuality. These are things that we can transcend, not through pushing them away or avoiding them or trying desperately to change, through surgeries or even escapism through drugs, but we can transcend those things through radical acceptance and integrating those things into our life and finding meaning in the pursuit of our gifts and connection with others who are on the same sort of path as us.
That's just so beautifully said, Laura. You're so wise for one so young. So again, thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing your story and I'm going to say inspiring people. So thank you so much. I'm really, it's been a privilege to talk to you today.
Well, thank you. I very much appreciate you as well.